on the Zero Hour. I'm your host, Richard RJ Eskow. As you know, this program has been covering closely the situation in Israel and Gaza, and for a long time now in Palestine overall. And what we've seen time and again is a lack of even-handedness in that reporting, something that serves in the end no one. And here to talk about that with us now is Robin Andersen. She works with the group Project Censored. We've had them on before. If you're Mickey Huff, who I believe is the director of that group, came on and spoke to us. I look forward to their annual collections every year of the most censored stories. And Robin is one of the people who is a judge for those most censored stories. Robin is an author, professor emerita of communication and media studies, and is an editor of a book series on media and humanitarian action. And I believe one of her latest book is Death in Paradise, New Meaning in the BBC Mystery Series, which is an interesting topic. And she has a book coming out called Censorship, Digital Media, and the Global Crackdown on Freedom of Expression, which is a huge and critically important topic. But the immediate inspiration for us joining us is an article she recently wrote, published on October 18th, on Project Censored. That's projectcensored.org, headlined How Big Media Facilitate Israeli War Crimes in Gaza. So, Robin Andersen, sorry for the long introduction, and welcome to the program.
Well, thanks so much. Thank you so much. It's thanks for inviting me.
Well, we're glad to have you, even under such grim circumstances. And I wanted to, without making you go through line by line, of course, through your piece, tell us, just overview to begin with on what you feel the bias is that we've seen since this, terrible attack on October 7th.
Yes. Well, what I tried to do in the article is kind of lay out a little bit of a narrative argument where we started out after the Hamas attacks on October 7th with images after images, kind of on a complete rotation of the killing of civilians. And the Hamas attack was awful. It killed hundreds of Israeli civilians, and it took hostages, and hundreds of children were killed as well. That came as the first violence. So when you start the narrative and you pull it out from a series of ongoing conflict and a long history of violence, you leave yourself open to what the media did, and that is providing no background. And for most of the established media, the violence was unprecedented, unpredictable, and came from nowhere. Without knowing why, where does this kind of awful violence come from? It simply becomes the evil of Hamas, and by extension, the Palestinians, who have long been called terrorists. Israeli violence has been mostly buried in the pages and on the television. So, without knowing where this comes from, right following those images were the numerous Israeli officials calling for a real retaliation, saying that these people are terrorists, they are inhuman animals. This is not something that human beings do, and therefore we are going to, really rain down on them. We're going to they want hell, we'll give them hell. We're going to turn it into a tent city. We're going to take out all of Gaza. So right away, the second element of the story is that you've got the demonization from Hamas going to the Palestinian people in Gaza. And that, to me, is a setup for really escalating the violence in a way that what we're seeing now, essentially, is what, for 4 days, almost 5 days, Biden's was trending on the hashtag Genocide Joe. So that's where we're at the moment still.
And I've done myself a lot of writing about this, including I did a piece on some statistics, because one of the things we heard even before Biden said it in the media was that this was Israel's 9/11. And then Biden, somebody on his staff did the arithmetic and said proportionally, based on Israel's much smaller population, the number of people killed in the Hamas attacks amounted to 15 9/11s for Israel. And if you'll forgive me just taking a moment, Rob, and I did a little bit of math, even before October 7th, the number of 9/11s from Israeli violence during the nonviolent protests of 2018, proportionally to Palestine's population, was more than 4. And the number of children-only 9/11s, if you want to put it that way, proportionally, between 2000 and 2014 was 40. So I guess what I'm driving at here is if you make that kind of analogy to try to make it concrete for one side and not for the other, and you don't point out the enormous loss of life as well as the other losses of freedom and so on, injuries, that it does seem to the American people as if it came out of nowhere. And so to make the case, for example, for a ceasefire, or to argue that it's inhumane, or even to bring up that war crimes are being committed, doesn't make sense to people because they think this was just an inhuman act. And I would argue, correct me if I'm wrong, but I would argue that the U.S. media has failed to make a distinction between the attacks and the Palestinian people as a whole, much less to provide some historical context for them. Instead, what I hear is that asking for context is compromising with waffling in the face of evil or something. Does any of that make sense to you?
Sure. I mean, I've been doxxed on social media trying to provide some rationality and caution into this formula, this media formula. And I think that's what you get when you mix the leaders and the fighters of an organization, and you mix those with the civilians. The Geneva Conventions are very clear on this. The retaliation against an entire population for the actions of their leaders is a war crime. The attempted annihilation of a culture and a people's is a war crime. And so there are many things that the Israeli bombing has done that also violate international law, since targeting civilians in transit from hospitals, and they say they had to leave, and then they target and kill those people. All of these things are crimes of war.
Yeah. Another
problem is,
sorry,
go ahead.
Another crime of war, by the way, is the internal or external displacement of large amounts of a population. That's clearly spelled out as a war crime, and yet 1 million people were told to move from the north to the south of Gaza, and then they bombed the south. These are important things for people to know. I haven't seen, correct me if I'm wrong, but I haven't seen much coverage of the war crime aspect of this, and I haven't seen much questioning. And I've been reading the White House press conferences with Admiral Kirby and others, and Karine Jean-Pierre. I haven't seen too many reporters asking about war crimes or delineating what those crimes might be and asking the U.S. position on them. Am I missing something?
No, in the mainstream media, there has not been, and in fact, there never really is, a kind of humanitarianism, a kind of peaceful negotiation, the kind of values that we call humanitarian values within a news frame. American news frames are always about vengefulness and a militarized response, because for so long, we always label our enemies terrorists, and we won't negotiate with them. We've done this over and over again historically, from Afghanistan, and most recently U.S. has blocked all of the attempts at the Europeans and anybody to negotiate in the Ukraine. And now the U.S. Now Hamas is saying, look, we'll give you back all of your hostages to stop the genocide. By this time, the momentum has built up where we don't know if there'll be a ceasefire or any ability to speak. But what happens with this media frame is very much part of legacy media, where we don't know anything historically about what has happened. And if you think about what's happened in mainstream media, Katie Halper was fired from the Hill on her TV monologue for talking about Israeli apartheid, for pointing out that the conditions under which the Palestinians live on a daily basis are inhuman, and that Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, all of these human rights organizations have criteria for which they label things apartheid, and they have said that this actually is worse than the South African apartheid because Africans had to work and they had to stay healthy. In Gaza, people's daily lives are restricted in every way, even including the calorie counts, their health care, all of these things. So this is a discourse that mainstream media just doesn't include in its reporting, and indeed people who try are taken off the air. MSNBC was criticized by Fox News for trying to even add some nuance into, well, are Hamas terrorists? Maybe we'll call them fighters, but you couldn't do that. So it's a very restricted news frame, which leaves out any way for the American public to understand this ongoing violence. And only by breaking this cycle of violence are we going to be able to move in any way toward peace and reconciliation. And there's no solution in the Middle East between Israel and the Palestinians unless there will never be peace unless we can come up with a solution. The only thing left is what we're seeing now.
And Robin, there's another angle of the coverage of the violence in Gaza, the attacks on Gaza, that I personally found very frustrating. Among the numbers I pulled together, as of a couple days ago, more than 20 hospitals had been ordered to evacuate by Israel in anticipation of bombing attacks, something that causes severe risk, including risk of death to patients, babies on incubators, people on other forms of life support. So that's 20 plus hospitals. Israel had documented, according to the World Health Organization, the WHO documented 72 attacks by Israel on healthcare delivery sites and healthcare workers. The number of attacks on healthcare sites whose origin has been questioned is one, and that's Al Ahli Hospital. And the media it's beginning to walk back a little bit, but for a couple of days it was saying, well, it's proven that that was a Palestinian stray rocket. Now it's, well, we think so. The intelligence agencies say so. But the fact is, it's not even being reported, A, as in dispute what the cause of that attack was, but B, it seems to me that the hyper focus on the perceived injustice of accusing Israel of that attack, when Israel warned that hospital it would attack, is odd to say the least. And all I hear on the media is discussion of, where the rocket came from for this one attack. Nobody talks about the 72 other facilities attacked, the 16 healthcare workers who have been killed on duty in Palestine since the bombing began, the 30 that were injured, and that's of a couple of days ago, much higher now because of night before last. So, or the 12 hospitals forced to close due to airstrikes or shortage of electricity and supplies, which is a long question, but it's a way of saying, just bringing up, since we're talking about the media, how enormously dishonest, I think it is, first of all, to claim this matter is settled, but secondly, even if it were settled, to use it to take away from what is undisputed, an undisputed campaign of attack on healthcare workers. Am I getting this story wrong or something?
Yeah, it's long from being settled that this was a Palestinian strike. If you recall, the New York Times first headline said, "Israeli strike hits hospital in Gaza, Palestinians say." Very quickly, the Israelis countered that with the misfire. That, oh no, that wasn't us. And why did the New York Times say that? Chris Hedges was a New York Times reporter and bureau chief, war reporter and bureau chief for the Times for 7 years in the Middle East. He right away recognized that Hamas or any jihadists did not have the missiles available with that kind of firepower to level that hospital. That was obvious to him, and my assumption is that's why Israel ran with it. Then immediately the Israelis put out, this is a misfire, and then they put out a tape, the supposedly a Hamas and a jihadist claiming that they did it. These people don't have the right accents. They don't have the right dialogue. They've got the wrong vocabulary. Everything about that tape was wrong. Everything about what they've said, claiming that it was Palestinian, is completely unverifiable. And pure logic tells you that it was them who did it. All of the things you just talked about. So what happens when this kind of propaganda enters this fray where it's already very biased media? You've got no way to counter it because really you don't have any Palestinian voices within the U.S. media. Finally, you've got the New York Times finally putting on an editorial 2 days ago from a Palestinian woman who tells that side of the story, but she never criticizes Israel. She never says apartheid. She just talks from her heart about being a Palestinian. So she cracked the code. She managed to get on there. But this is a very patterned and documented Israeli strategy to put up false audiovisual and to simply keep lying, in the words of Chris Hedges. I found it when I wrote about the assassination of Shireen Abu Akleh, the veteran Al Jazeera reporter. Right away, they put up some video that said it was a Palestinian fighter and she was caught in the crossfire. She was very much after, all of this, every single news organization, every single investigation that went in frame by frame and looked at the whole thing. And we're talking numerous, 20, at least 20. At the most 20, probably more like 15, documented blow by blow that the line of trajectory, she had a vest, she had a hat, she had a helmet, the bullet came into her neck. This was a targeted hit. Finally, the New York Times acknowledges it was from an Israeli convoy, but that allowed all of this time, allowed President Biden to finally let the Israelis off the hook and not pursue an investigation and not charge them with the deliberate death of Shireen Abu Akleh. And you've got to know that hangs over the Biden administration in the Middle East, where they seem to over and over again lose their ability to talk from a legitimate human rights perspective and tell their client states that they need to stop doing things like this.
Robin, you make such a great point about the passage of time. I do want to note Shireen Abu Akleh was an American citizen killed with an American-made bullet by a military funded by the United States of America, and yet, there's been no kind of prosecution for her. She's one of, even before the latest round of violence, one of 20 journalists that have been killed by the Israeli military with no repercussions in the last couple decades. So, it seems there's open season on journalists there. And I would also, but the passage of time is so important. I've had people say to me, well, U.S. intelligence and the U.S. military says, for example, in the case of Al-Ahli Hospital, that this was a Palestinian rocket. Well, first of all, again, you're forgetting all the other healthcare workers killed by Israeli bombings and the other facilities attacked, and according to some accounts, singled out for attack. but the passage of time, you and I will remember the stories of troops taking babies out of incubators in Kuwait, which was later proven to be false, but allowed a passage of time. We will remember stories of Saddam buying yellow cake uranium and weapons of mass destruction. And I mean, we can go back to the Gulf of Tonkin incident. We can go back to, remember the Maine. I mean, it's not as if the U.S. military or U.S. intelligence services haven't, lied to the American people in many cases. The press doesn't do its job. And maybe eventually the truth comes out. But it seems to me that time is being instrumentalized here. I suspect the truth will come out about Al Ahli Hospital, but every day more people die, and that's the plan. Maybe I'm cynical, so correct me if I am, but it seems to me that's the plan to stall until the emotions have cooled for the people who are outraged by this attack, so that it can go on. But how does that? Let's broaden out a little bit, if you don't mind. How does the media get drawn into this dance of going along with this? I'm old school. I thought that you told truth to power if you were in journalism, and no matter who cursed you or condemned you, if your military or your government was not telling the truth, it was your sacred mission as a journalist to get out there. How do we get into a state like this where they're just repeating these lethal either lies or assumptions, or depending on the situation? What do you have any thoughts on that?
I think for many years now in American public life, the Israeli lobby has been successful in damping down any criticism of Israel. They started with the Canary mission in 2014, which attacked academics, faculty, students, anybody who was working in solidarity with Palestine. Letters were sent trying to get them fired from their universities. Students were prevented from being hired if they worked in these organizations. You've got that. You've got the AIPAC entering into Democratic primaries, where anyone who doesn't completely support Israel has been, actually, they've been successful in pushing them out of Democratic primaries. So we've got that atmosphere. So amidst that atmosphere, and you're right about the instrumentalization of time. This all happened so fast. The Israelis got in there fast, and they started bombing immediately, and then they kept saying they were escalating, even when no alternative voices were allowed in the media. Then here comes the atrocity propaganda, the babies that you mentioned. Now, we can ask, why even do that? There was already huge momentum, and even people who have worked hard on exposing Israeli violence against Palestinian civilians, the ones I've mentioned that have identified it as apartheid, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, even here in New York City, where I'm close to, the Center for Constitutional Rights, widely condemned the Hamas attacks. The Hamas attacks were also civilian deaths, which is also a crime of war. They killed civilians.
Yeah.
That was roundly criticized by everyone in the media. Why do we add this atrocity propaganda? Why the cutting off of the heads of babies that was Nader verified? If we look at the source of that, it was a fanatical Israeli settler named David Ben Zion, who was also a soldier who had engaged in lynch mobs on an occupied Palestine, and he was the one that put it on I-24 channel, on Israel's channel, a somewhat small channel. And then it was picked up by the BBC and so many mainstream news organizations here in the United States. And within days, the beheaded story was found to be, outrageous propaganda with no evidence. But still today, politicians are still talking about it. They beheaded babies, and Biden's White House even had to walk it back. Well, he said he saw the pictures, but he really didn't. But what is that type of atrocity propaganda for? It was already condemned, because it adds another layer of, if you will excuse my word, hatred onto Palestinians that can then justify what we are experiencing now, what they are experiencing now. And we sit here trying to figure it out and understanding, while the news frame powers forward with this. And this is a crime of genocide, what they're doing. By all legitimate definitions, this is genocide, and we can't seem to stop it now, with the Biden White House preventing AOC and Rashida Tlaib from even calling for a ceasefire. But they're doing it anyway, and we can only hope that those voices start to be able to enter the frame now.
And another dimension of this for me, Robin, is that I should know better by now, but I'm still shocked, is what I would call the liberal embrace of censorship. We've seen, the 92nd Street Y cancel an invitation for a Pulitzer Prize winning author to be part of a panel, nothing to do with Israel or Gaza, but because he had signed an open letter calling for a ceasefire. So he was disinvited. We're seeing, Jewish Currents magazine has covered, which does some really good work, has covered the silencing of Palestinian voices in the mainstream media, including Palestinians who were invited on and then disinvited because they were pre-screened. What will you answer to this question? What will you answer to that? And, if you do media appearances, that's unusual. And then based on the answers, disinvited if they weren't satisfying enough. And it seems to me that, while we demonize the right in this country, often, I think correctly, for wanting to censor voices, we're seeing more and more in the last several years, not just on Israel, Gaza, but other things as well, a sort of liberal and mainstream embrace of the idea. You've written, I want to read your book when it comes out. You've written about digital media and the effect of that. We're seeing all sorts of suppression of voices who are anti-colonialist, who are, yes, there have been such censorship of, I suppose, right-wing as well, but it seems to me the voices that really get censored are the ones that challenge the hegemonic viewpoint. And I feel that that's getting cheered on by the people that in the quote-unquote good old days, which weren't so great, would have been appalled. And I don't know if you share that perception or that concern, but I'm really afraid that we're in for, an era of smiley-faced totalitarianism if this doesn't change.
No, I completely agree with that. And it is happening. And I do agree with your point that, the old school journalism, you verified your sources before you printed them. Exactly. So that's how a lot of this stuff happens. No verification, you just print it. But back to cyber laws that the likes of Alan McLeod and other investigative journalists have been documenting the way that the CIA, for example, is part of Facebook monitors, that the FBI has been spying on Google. And this is increasing. We've only seen the tip of the iceberg of the way in which the national security state has gotten into monitoring big tech platforms. And yes, we wrote a lot about that in the book. One of the things that is such a problem with this is that cyber laws also are now around the world, where the worst kind of authoritarian governments have passed cyber laws to quell criticism, always under the guise, or many times under the guise of, this is misinformation, fake news, or hate news. I've been online. I've been on Twitter much of this time, and so many Palestinian voices have been taken off. Even as the Israeli military, the IDF website is kind of on constantly bragging about what they're doing and showing their airstrikes and stuff. So it's a very imbalanced world, and the good news about this is just the other day, Consortium News has sued the U.S. government and NewsGuard for deliberately targeting sources critical of the U.S. National security policy, such as Consortium News is, flagging all 20,000 of their news, their archives and videos, even though they only identified 6 possible stories, not even videos, that they disliked, and then labeling all of them as you're probably looking at disinformation. Watch out. The other way they do it is that Google has also partnered with the CIA and the national security state, and that's where these algorithms come from. So artificial intelligence is applied to take out anything that. Now, how can that really happen? Any disinformation that is going to be taken out. So many of the alternative and independent news sites, such as Consortium News, The Intercept, Democracy Now!, all these places have lost so many hits because Google searches no longer take you to their sites. And this is really, I hope that this Consortium News, because it's right based on the First Amendment, and they've got a good lawyer, and I'm hoping it's going to get some more play, and that they're going to be invited on radio shows to talk about it, because this is very deeply ensconced in protecting the First Amendment and based on First Amendment law. And I'm really hopeful that this can help reverse some of this.
I was blocked from editing Wikipedia for a year by an unnamed editor who wrote, "This individual has shown an unusual level of interest in Israel and Gaza." Or Israel and Palestine, excuse me. I was blocked from Twitter for 8 months. And I'm like nobody, but we've had Max Blumenthal on from the Gray Zone. They raised $92,000 through one of these GoFundMe, and they wouldn't give it to them because of a complaint from an external source. We could go on and on. To me, Robin, I guess in conclusion on this part of it, I think globally, in a way, this is the most frightening thing of all. I mean, I've been in openly totalitarian countries where your mail is being read. You might get something with pieces snipped out. Somebody's call might not go through, or there's a click. Somebody's listening. What we're talking about now is you'll never know. I might follow a Max Blumenthal. We've had our differences, Max and I, but he's a good friend, but, I might follow him or someone else and never know that they wrote something I didn't see, or we learned that for 2 days, Twitter wasn't even allowing links to the Hunter Biden laptop story. So terrifying. It's as if I could call you on the phone, but if I mention Hunter Biden's laptop, you'll never know I said it. This to me is taking totalitarianism to the next level. And I mean, I'll give you the last word, but I just wish we had I wish we had an old-fashioned liberal media, in the sense not of left or right, Democratic or Republican, but in the sense of, get me rewrite, or if I source something wrong or get a quote wrong or a fact wrong, I'm clinically depressed for 3 days. I can't recover from it. They don't give a damn, and I wish they cared about that. I wish more people cared about an open media. I wish more people cared about not being censored by electronic corporate and state watchdogs, but where, I guess in conclusion, where's the outrage about all of this stuff? I forget who said where's the outrage, but I guess network or something. But now it's cognitive network. Where's the outrage? I don't know. What do you think in closing?
I think you're right. I've been shadow banned, and that's bad too, because you don't know when they're blocking your quotes to other people. I did notice that. I don't have that many followers. I'm a nobody, but I noticed that I usually get more likes and reposts than what I was getting when I was actually pushing my article out that I had written. And for days it was like one or two, and usually I've got 20, 25 notifications that I've heard from somebody. So I'm sure I was shadow banned, but we have no way of knowing. So that's really is Big Brother. I think that you're right always also to point out that this kind of dichotomy between the left and the right, and we're supposed to be progressive, so we're supposed to go along with everything, or that's even true in this case, that this isn't. If there's a horrible way to put it, it's that this is bipartisan. And I think the new Speaker of the House just actually talked about online censorship. And that's pretty awful that I'm quoting this Republican who's finally after all this time now, is assuming the role as the head of the completely disheveled and cartoonish party of the Republicans. But you're right to point out that so it's this left and right frame that puts this, you can't say good things about what Republicans have said about our loss of free speech and censorship. And that also quiets us down, but it also needs to be reframed as something that all Americans should be concerned with. And one of the reasons that we don't know anything about algorithms and how this stuff works is the mainstream media benefits from it, and so they don't expose it. So there's all of these things coming into everything that's wrong with the media. And I think we only got to a few, but I really appreciate talking to you. Thanks.
Yes, absolutely. Same here. And I'll just say on Facebook, if I post an article, one or two people like it. If I post a picture of my cat, 150 people like it. But so Robin Andersen, again, is a judge for Project Censored, contributor to their forthcoming State of the Free Press 2024. You should check out her article at projectcensored.org, Corporate Media's Dehumanization of Palestine. Thanks for your great work, Robin, and thanks so much for coming on the program.
Thanks so much for having me. It was great to be with you.
Yeah. And we'll be right back after this. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.